Okay, so welcome everybody. Happy Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2019. So hope everybody has had a great day today, a special day if you have loved ones involved in your life, and primary loved one we all have, we never are without, is ourselves, right? So we need to embrace and enjoy and love ourselves. Whatever that means for each of us is very important every day, but just a reminder on today, Valentine's Day, when I think most people are thinking about other people and loving other people on Valentine's Day, which is fine, but we have to start with ourselves first, don't we? And when I talk about love, and those of you who've heard me talk about Jesus's view on love, it's about accepting ourselves for who we are, not who we wish we were. Same thing with other people. And so that means that if we have things we don't like about ourselves, I wish I had hair on the top of my head. I can hear Harpo laughing right now. Whatever it is. It could be physical like that. It could be, I wish I didn't have this mental hang up or some emotional knee-jerk reaction to certain things. We have these little things about ourselves that we may not think as perfect. Nobody's perfect. And so self-love, what Jesus taught was self-love means loving all of ourselves, everything about ourselves, not just the stuff that we like, also the stuff that we're not crazy about. We need to embrace that as part of who we are. That's important. So that's an important component of self-love. All right. So happy Valentine's Day in that way to everyone. So just a couple logistical things. First of all, those of you who are new on here, just a reminder that you can, if you're on the computer, you can type questions to me in that chat box there, which actually, thanks for reminding myself, I'm going to move the chat box over to where I can see it. Okay, now I can see it. If anybody's writing in any chat stuff. Questions, and there's a way that you can click on the down button there. That in my computer it's blue, it's an arrow, and it says entire audience. That's the default, but you can make it private, and you can just ask me private questions, and on mine anyway it turns pink. And so then you're just asking me a question, and I won't say your name, etc., etc. And you can type those anytime during the session while I'm talking, so you don't have to forget, and you can pay attention to what I'm saying. And then I'll go back in the Q&A, and we'll go back and we'll look at all those and so forth. And then, of course, anybody who's on the phone and anybody who's live on the live web link as well can ask questions verbally, of course. Okay? So also I want to mention, just a heads up, I sent you and everybody a link last night. So if you didn't see it, check it out. A podcast TV interview that I was on a week ago or so. Interview by Jennifer Evans on her show. It's called Generosity, little play on words by her. It's Generosity with a J because her name is Jennifer. And I got into stuff that I have not gotten into before ever publicly. I've never publicly talked about that lifetime with Jesus as openly as I did on that recording, on that session that's recorded, obviously. So you may want to check that out. I don't want to get into that today because today, as you know, this is session 2. We're going to talk about NDEs and OBEs and related experiences. We're going to stay focused on that topic today. But you may want to listen to that generosity session because it'll inform you for the next several sessions that we have in this series, and it may give you some more material that you may draw questions. Even those of you who have done this series before, there's a number of you who've done this twice before. There's There's a number of you who, for whom this is your third time through this series of 6. And there's stuff on there I've never said before. And so it may give you some content that'll cause you to pause and reflect, and you may come up with new questions that you never asked in the previous sessions that you were in with me here, okay? So just a heads up on that. And just from a where to find it issue, where to find the link, not only is it there, and obviously the email I just mentioned that I sent to you last night, but also it's on Facebook. Hold on a sec. Dust in the air, dust in the throat. It's on the Facebook pages that I have on my timeline and so forth. The link is there. But it will always be, if it's hard for you to find, Facebook is, after a while you have so many posts. It's like, where was that? It was like 3 months ago or 6 months ago. I know he posted it. The easier place to go is to go to one of my websites. Either go to kelvinchin.org or overcomingthefearofdeath.org. Either one of those websites, and it's there in the videos under media interviews, or it may just be under the video, but you'll see it there. And by the way, for those of you who are new to working with me, and just a reminder to everybody else who's already been working with me for some time, you can get to navigate any of my websites by going to the bottom of any page on any of the websites, and the links to the other 3 websites are there. There's 4 websites, and so they link. The easy thing, you don't have to remember what was the name of that one. You don't have to remember that. You just go to the bottom of any page on any of the websites, and there's a hot link, meaning there's a link that connects. That's what hot link means. There's a link that connects to these other websites, my other websites. Okay, there you go. All right, let's get into the content. So today, session 2, we want to talk about, can we get a glimpse of the other side? And the reason I have this as the second session, by the way, is because I want to kind of ease into this stuff, this material, gradually. And for those of you who really haven't had much experience the other side, or maybe haven't even thought about it that much, I want to kind of logically going through an unfoldment in a sense, you could say, an unfoldment of these concepts, these ideas, in a logical, rational way. How would one think about these things that may sound kind of far out if you've never had experiences or thought about these much? So we're talking about glimpses now, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. And so the short term for each of those is NDE or OBE. And so if you hear people using those acronyms, you know what they mean, okay? So let's talk about OBEs first, out-of-body experiences, before we get into the NDE, near-death experience discussion. OBEs, I think, are much more common than you may even realize. It may sound kind of far out, it may sound kind of far-reaching to you, but I would argue that it's a much more common experience that we all have than we realize. And as you guys know, you've heard me say, and you heard me say at the last session, what am I all about? I'm all about demystifying what most people consider mystical stuff. I'm into making it every day. This is common experience, and I want to make these experiences as commonplace for everybody, not just experientially, but in the ability to easily talk about these things. That's the goal of all the work that I do, okay? It's another way of saying reducing fear, overcoming fear, taking fear away, is making these things commonplace, not mystical, not distant. So, out-of-body experiences that we experience every day. Everybody does. When you go to sleep at night, you have an out-of-body experience. Dreaming is an out-of-body experience as far as I'm concerned. The way I'm defining it in a very, very broad general sense. So everybody dreams. Now, are there people who don't remember their dreams? Yes. I was just talking to my sister-in-law. I had dinner with her up in Boston As many of you know, I'm in Pennsylvania now, traveling, doing a bunch of speaking and so forth, and attending conferences. But my sister-in-law had dinner at her house just the other day. She said she doesn't dream. She's never experienced dreaming. She knows that she dreams because she reads that people dream, but she has never experienced dreaming. Yes, there are people like that. But those of us who have experienced dreaming know what it is. Not just intellectually, we know experientially what dreaming is. And when we dream, we intellectually know that we are lying in the bed, not flying through the air like we are in the dream, or swimming underwater like we are in the dream. Or my friend George just told me a dream that he had, I think last night or the night before or something, where he was being pulled by these underwater serpents that were very friendly, and he was being pulled underwater by them, and they were going so fast that the water bubbles were percolating, back into his face, so that he was breathing the water bubbles. He could breathe underwater because there were so many bubbles, and he was about 2 or 3 feet under the water, and he was going really fast. And he went from, what did he say? He went from Japan to England in a matter of minutes. So it was like, so was he really doing that? George lives in San Francisco. If his daughter, if his 13, 14-year-old daughter went into his bedroom while he was dreaming, would she see him in the bed? Or would he be out of the bed gone? No, she would see him lying in the bed. But his mind was experiencing something very different from his body. That's what we all have experienced. Those of us who have experienced dreaming, we've had similar kinds of experience. They don't have to be that kind of unusual. It could just be like walking down the street in your dream. Well, you're not walking down the street. Your body is lying in bed. That's an out-of-body experience as far as I'm concerned. That is a separation of our mind-body experience. There's a distinction there that's going on. Are you really leaving your body, or are you ignoring your body at that time? Well, that's a philosophical discussion we could have. But either way, I would say it's an example of an out-of-body experience that we all experience, most of us, my sister-in-law being an exception, perhaps. Another example of a sort of more out-of-body experience is something that those of you who meditate have probably experienced at various times during a meditation, and it may happen for the whole meditation. It may happen for a split second. It may happen every once in a while, but this is not an uncommon experience. You may not have experienced this. This is not a right or wrong thing. I'm just giving it as an example. But I would say this is an example where initially, at least, this initial stage that I'm describing, where you're sitting there meditating and maybe you're not sure, like you see my hands, those of you can see my hands. I'm sitting there and maybe I start out, my hands are sitting on my lap. When I'm meditating, they're just sitting there, resting on my lap, whatever. During my meditation, I'm not sure. Are my hands on my lap, or were they like this, or were they like this? You're just unaware of your physical body positioning and so forth. Why? Because your mind, in a sense, is ignoring the body. It's maybe not a full-blown what some people refer to as an out-of-body experience. I was completely out of my body looking at my body. No, but you're just unaware of your body. In that sense, that's what I mean by ignoring the body. The mind is experiencing that, however. What's my point? My point is I'm just using this as another example that many people have had that is an experience of separation of the mind and the body. All right? Now, have people also had experiences sometimes, perhaps when they're meditating, perhaps when they're not meditating, perhaps when they're sleeping, any different times of states of consciousness, in other words, at various times, have they had an experience sometimes where they are outside of their body, looking, observing their body? Yes, people have had that experience. My daughter has had that experience. I know another friend, a person who I taught to meditate, who I've become friends with, she had that experience where she was, during her meditation, she just spontaneously found herself looking at herself, her body, herself sitting there in 2018, this was last year, 2018 time period, looking at herself. In other words, it wasn't a past life thing. She was looking at herself in that time period, but she was at the foot of the bed. Her mind was looking at her body. So that's a more progressed state, we could say, of an out-of-body experience. But I would argue that all of these are various progressions of an out-of-body experience, showing what? Separation of mind and body, mind being distinct from each other. Okay? Not the same. And this is separate from this whole notion of afterlife and everything. We're just talking about the distinction between mind and body. Even my father, who believed in the first belief system, remember the first belief system that I talk about is the physical science belief, where this is it, one life, no afterlife, etc. Even my father would agree that his mind and his body were different from each other. They were the experience of each of those two things, the mind and the body, were different from each other. Anybody want to, let me take a break here, just pause. Anybody want to share any out-of-body experiences that they may have had before I tell you about one of mine? Anybody? I'm just opening it up temporarily to the floor. Feel free to speak. Harpo, I see your question. I will talk about that at the end. Remind me if I don't, Harpo. In high school, Susan, you want to tell the group about it? You can unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself if you want to speak.
I was trying to type fastidiously.
Easier to speak. Go ahead.
The most impressive one I had that I'll never forget was in high school. We had a common lunchroom area, and my group of friends tended to sit on the floor on the outside of the school theater, notably enough, outside of artwork of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, which is kind of funny in hindsight. But we were sitting there eating, and I just found myself looking down at myself from like up in the ceiling while I was having lunch. It was very odd. Yes, that was it.
That was it. Yeah, just spontaneous, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, high school is stressful, but other than that,
right.
Spontaneous, I guess.
right. Spontaneous, no drug-induced anything, and just
no.
Yeah. Not to get personal, but anyway, I guess we are getting personal when we tell these experiences. But what? No, yeah, exactly. Just spontaneously, that can happen. And you bring up a point. You remind me of a point to bring up, which is that no one should ever think about any of these experiences that we're talking about, whether it's this, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, past life experiences, anything that I share with you or other people share in terms of their experiences. Don't ever think that, they can have that experience because of X, because they're older than I am, or because they've been meditating longer than I have been, or they've been a vegetarian longer than I have been, and by the way, I'm not a vegetarian, so I am not. so don't judge yourself, is my point, based on any yardstick of anything. And I came out of the, as you guys know, I came out of the TM organization many years ago, and that was a big problem in that organization, and in many organizations. I don't want to pick on them, but many spiritual organizations. So I had firsthand experience. That's the one I have firsthand experience with. That's the only reason I mention it. But many spiritual organizations and spiritual groups or whatever, they tend to promote this idea that, you got to reach this level before you can have that experience, or you got to be doing the meditation for this long, or you got to be going to this many weekend retreats, or you got to go whatever. You know, you got to eat this diet. You got to, you know, have these oils on your forehead in a certain time, or what? No, you have to smell this certain incense. No, all of these experiences can happen. First of all, by anyone at any time, whether you meditate or not. Number one. Number two, they do not indicate any higher level of development, evolution, state of consciousness, all of that, none of that, okay? That's one of the main messages from me, and one of the main messages from Jesus, John the Baptist, Jehovah. We'll get into that in subsequent sessions, but just so you know, take all of this in, embrace it, and own it as possible experiences that you can have, okay? All right, let me just share with you an experience that I had. And this kind of fits into what I'm saying here in terms of this could happen to anybody kind of experience. It's happened in 2002. So what's that? 17 years ago I had this experience. It happened at approximately 3 a.m. in the morning. And I was married then. And as you guys probably know, I've talked about my kids. I have two children. And so 17 years ago, Sammy was 7 years old and Jesse was, 23 years old. Is that right? No, he was 17 years ago, he was 13 years old. So my kids were much younger. They were asleep in their rooms. I was with my wife sleeping in our bedroom. I woke up around 3 in the morning and I was thirsty. Okay? So, hey, this is normal, everyday, not spiritual anything kind of experience. You wake up in the middle of the night, I'm kind of thirsty. I want to get some water. Okay, I started to stir in the bed just very quietly, gently. I didn't want to wake up my wife, but I did. Because she must have been, in the outswing, in her, cyclical dreaming thing. Her metabolism must have swung up a little bit. So she was kind of more close to the surface of being awake, and it just woke her up enough. So she said, "Oh, you're okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just getting some water." She said, "Oh, would you get me some water too?" Okay, great. So now she's awake, right? So what I did was in our bed, and this was before I have a Tempur-Pedic bed. I can't do that now in this bed, on my bed. But we had a spring-loaded mattress then. You know what that is. So what I did was I kicked my feet out to the end of the bed really fast. I bounced on my butt on the bed, and I sat right up. I stood right up. You know how you boom, bounce, stand up. So it was just like 1, 2, 3 in a matter of what's that? 2 seconds, 3 seconds at the most. I went from lying prone, flat, asleep, to standing up. All right. I start walking out the bedroom, at the foot of the bed, walking out of the bedroom, and it was pitch black, 3 in the morning. And I know the route to the kitchen to get water. We had lived in the house for a number of years by then already, and in Los Angeles. And I started walking out, and I thought, here's the important part of the story, I thought I was walking down the hallway. The next thing I know, my head hurts right here, those you can see, right at the top of the crown of my head. It hurt, really badly, like a lot of pain right here. And that's the thought that I had. So I think I'm walking down the hallway. I can kind of visualize what the hallway looks like, but it's pitch black, so I'm not seeing anything with my eyes. I'm just visualizing it with my mind. So follow me here. I'm visualizing the hallway with my mind. I still think I'm walking down the hallway with my mind. I experience significant pain right here in my head. I open my eyes up, which I didn't realize my eyes were closed because I thought I was still walking down the hallway in pitch black darkness with my eyes open. But evidently I wasn't. I open my eyes up and I see myself enough. I can't even put those of you who can see me on the screen. I'm wrapped up in a pretzel like this. I mean, I can't even do the position that I was in because I don't have like real flexible body this lifetime. But I was all wrapped up, crumpled up on the floor, right outside my bedroom door, and I had slammed my head against the wall. I was crumpled up in the corner, right outside the door, and I banged my head against the wall. I had passed out because I had done this bump, bump, and I'm stood up really fast. No blood in my head, in my brain, right? Hello, it's a machine. This physical body, these beautiful physical bodies that we have are machines. They need blood, and they need blood flow, and they need blood flow in the brain. Well, I was, just woken up from a deep sleep and went boom, boom, stood up, no blood in my brain. I walked 2 or 3 steps out. I make it about 2 or 3 steps, and I collapsed. I passed out, hit my head. So and I'm not suggesting that you do this, but don't try this at home. But what I noticed was my mind was wide awake during the whole experience. I thought I was still walking down the hallway. That's the important takeaway. So I had an out-of-body experience, right? This is not your normal, what you would describe as your, oh, wow, that's a really spiritual out-of-body experience, Kelvin. That's not what most people would say, right? This is like I slam my head against the wall. Don't do this. Don't do this at home. This is not recommended. This is like the disclaimer on the bottom of the TV commercial. But I thought I was still walking down the hallway. My mind was wide awake the whole time until I felt the physical pain. That's what I'm talking about. Distinction between mind, body. That was the closest experience to death in this lifetime that I have had. I've never had a near-death experience like some people have. Car accidents, dying during surgery, seeing themselves. We'll talk about that in a second, those kinds of experiences. But this was an out-of-body experience that I had where I was healthy, just no blood in the brain, passed out. Mind still was wide awake the entire time. Interesting, right? So just again, those are different examples of what I consider proof that our mind and the body, our minds and our body are not connected. Evidence that our mind is continuing separate from the body's partial functioning in my case, or non-functioning in some cases that we'll get to in these near-death experiences. Okay? All right. Any comments? Anything anybody want to share before I continue and talk about NDEs? We'll get into questions in a minute about these things, but I want to cover the NDEs before we get into questions, so we can have questions about OBEs also. Any burning anything? Anybody want to share an experience out of body? Okay. All right. So let's talk about NDEs, near-death experiences. And by the way,
hey, Kelvin.
Yes.
Kel.
Yes.
Does it? I don't know if this is an OBE.
Okay.
But there have been times where, like, I am lying down, trying to go to sleep, and then all of a sudden I will feel this force, just this energy. I'll feel it pulling from me, and I'm aware, and I'm telling it, get back in here, don't leave, and then I'm back in. I don't know if that's just drifting off to sleep, but I mean, it's only happened a couple times where I actually literally am fighting with myself to come back, because if I don't fight, I feel like I would have been out of my body.
Okay. Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll feel like I've had times where I'm drifting and then I hurry up and abruptly will grab something because all of a sudden I'm falling and I get scared.
Yes.
You know, like a free fall.
Yes.
And then a couple vivid dreams where, like your friend, I was underwater, smelled orange citrus, was breathing underwater.
Yes.
It was very beautiful. It felt real, but obviously I was not underwater. That's probably a dream, not really an OBE, but it was very vivid, very lucid. I felt like I was literally a fish, like breathing underwater. You know what I mean?
Yes, I've had those dreams. Yes, I've had exactly that similar dream as what you just described underwater, breathing underwater. I can still remember the caves and so forth I had a human body and I was going and who knows? Yeah. So yeah, those are dreams, and that said, those are examples of what we're talking about in terms of the separation of the mind and the body, not being inextricably connected. But yeah, not so much an out of body experience. I think you're right. The experience that I think many of us have had another experience that you described of kind of feeling like you're falling as you kind of feel like you're falling, you kind of catch yourself. That's just that's I think that is, for me anyway, that those are experiences where I probably was falling. In other words, I'm kind of reliving a fear of catching myself from who knows when. It could have been last week, it could have been 20 years ago, it could have been 200 years ago. I don't know when, it doesn't matter. But then I'm just kind of catching myself, and there's a little bit of a stress there from that's left over. But I always look at those as good things, because it's kind of like in meditation, like when I taught you to meditate, the thoughts where, it's just releasing old junk. Well, that's good. That's great. Don't resist it. You know what I mean? And then the other experience that you talked about, Jamila, where you're kind of slipping out and you're like, that fear of letting go there, that I think my experience is over time that goes away, or it's very gradual. It depends on who you are, what your chemistry is. Everybody's different, it's unique. I mean, you're a doctor, so you know how different people are chemistry-wise. But over time, over a long period of time, that tends to fall away. Now, why does that tend to not feel like, oh, I don't want to let go? At first, you may feel like that because of a little fear. The way I describe it, there's a fear of like coming back almost. There's a fear of like coming back into the body if we leave the body. Okay? But once we get more and more familiar with being out of the body, we become more comfortable. In a sense, we're just figuratively using this, allowing our mind to be out of the body. Okay? And how do you do? And how do you inculcate that over time? Meditation, I think, is the best way to do that, because meditation, that's what we're doing. We're letting our mind out of that 8-inch plastic bucket that I talk about with all of you, before. We're letting our mind wander and so forth during the meditation. Well, that is allowing the mind to expand its capacity of wakeful experience. Well, what that does is we become more grounded, because we don't fear us coming back into our body. That's the thing, okay? So over time, it happens. It's a gradual thing, over time. Okay, but those are good points. So let's talk about near-death experiences, all right? So what are near-death experiences? I'm going to read from my book here. You've seen my book. Many of you have seen my book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. Let me read you a couple paragraphs here about near-death experiences, commonly known as by the acronym NDE, as we said earlier. NDEs are experiences that an individual has that is associated with impending death, which can encompass any combination of multiple possible sensations, including mental detachment from the body, feelings of levitation or lightness, being at peace or total serenity, feeling safe or secure, warmth, and the presence of light. So any of those are just kind of many ways that people will describe this experience subjectively. According to a Gallup poll conducted in 1992, 13 million Americans reported having had an NDE. At that time, that was 5% of the U.S. population. Similar statistical studies have been conducted in other countries with similar results. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what an NDE is, or you haven't had a near-death experience, let's talk about a couple. And I want to talk about a couple of ones that I talk about in the book, and then I want to hear if anybody else has heard of others. Maybe it's not your NDE, but you've heard of other NDEs that you want to share with the group in a minute. That would be cool. But I like these two, and I included these two in particular in my book because they're very different from each other. And I'm actually an administrator on Facebook of an NDE, a near-death experience Facebook group called Fear of Death and Near-Death Experiences. And you see a lot on these there's a bunch of other near-death experience groups on Facebook as well. But you see a lot of people talk about, well, I had a near-death experiences, and this is what happens in near-death experiences. Well, no, that's what happened in your near-death experience, but that may not, and that does not happen. I know that all near-death experiences are not the same, because I know people who've had near-death experiences that are very, very different. And I've probably heard, I know I have friends, maybe a dozen or more, who've told me their personal near-death experiences, and each of them is different from the other ones. So not just the details and the circumstances of when they happen, but the actual experience themselves are different. Okay, so one of them, and I'll just kind of do them in kind of short form summary, and then we'll open up to questions in a couple minutes. You can read the longer versions in the book. But my friend Henry Dearborn, a buddy of mine from Dartmouth, we were friends there. He learned to meditate when I was there, and we roomed together after Dartmouth in graduate school at Yale. Henry told me that when he was 8 years old, he had a near-death experience, and he had his tonsils out. And a lot of people have their tonsils out. This is not an unusual surgical procedure, and it's not considered a particularly risky surgical procedure either. And his surgical procedure of taking his tonsils out went fine. That wasn't the issue. What happened was he went home afterwards, and his mom felt, oh, poor Henry, he just had his tonsils out. I'll bake a bunch of cookies for him. And she gave him some cookies to eat, 8-year-old Henry. And probably some of the cookies, undoubtedly, for sure, some of the cookies were at least very crispy, hard cookies, sharp cookies. So he ate the cookie, one of the cookies, it severed his sutures in the back of his throat, and he was bleeding internally. He collapsed, he was unconscious, he was on the living room floor. Mother didn't know what was going on. She sees her 8-year-old son collapsed, unconscious. Of course, she's freaking out. She called the doctor and so forth. The whole time, Henry told me he was up on the ceiling. So this is a common, although not all NDEs are like this, but this is a very common way that people describe it. They see themselves, their body. They're outside of their body. And in this case, he was up on the ceiling of the living room, looking down at his 8-year-old body, thinking, why is mom so upset? I'm fine. I feel great. And he said he was totally at peace within himself, not afraid of anything. He felt great mentally. But he was watching his little 8-year-old body down there and his mom freaking out. Doctor comes. He sees the doctor come. He hears the whole conversation. Doctor says, we're not going to wait for an ambulance. It's going to be take too long. We got to get him to the hospital immediately. This was back in the 1950s, so back when doctors actually made house calls. Those of you who are old enough to know about such a thing. Anyway, doctor came and right over and put Henry in the back seat of the car with his mom and took him to the emergency room. And Henry was in the back of the car, outside of his body, on the ceiling of the car, inside of the car, watching his mom freaking out and watching his body just unconscious, looking dead, basically, lying in his mom's lap. Heard the whole conversation, remembered the whole conversation, went to the emergency room. They took care of him. He told his mom afterwards who came when the doctor came, what he said. He told his mom what the nurses, how many nurses, the doctors, and what the doctors said and to the nurses and all this stuff. He recounted the whole thing to his mom afterwards. How would he know this, right? So he was consciously aware. Clearly a separation of his mind and his body. That's the whole point. Near-death experience. So that's one experience. Henry's experience, having his tonsils out. Another friend of mine, Jay Peters, was dead for 20 minutes. He was medically, clinically dead. No brain, no breathing, no heart, no oxygen. 20 minutes. Those of you who know anything about medicine know that 4 to 6 minutes is about the max time. That's about the maximum time you can be without oxygen before, if they bring you back, you're guaranteed to have brain damage, even if you live. And most of the time, after 4 to 6 minutes, you die. You're physically, you're dead. That's it. They can't bring you back. 20 minutes. He was in the hospital. Our mutual friend Diane Rousseau, was sitting by his bedside. During his whole intensive care unit experience, which happened a week before he had the NDE. So he was out of intensive care. He was in the next stage of, hospitalization, just being monitored closely for another week or something after that. So he was in that wing of the hospital. He was not in ICU anymore. And he was in that wing of the hospital, but Diane was staying by his bedside the whole time because Jay had had medical issues his whole life since he was 10 or 11 years old. Type 1 diabetes, very serious stuff. And he was 54 years old when this happened. He coded. You know what that means? So he flatlined. You get this the solid tone on all the monitors that he's hooked up to in the hospital in Seattle. And Diane went out the hallway, yelled code, nurses, 8 or 10 nurses and doctors come running in. They do the whole thing. They do the paddles. They shoot the chemicals into the pharmaceuticals into him to try to get his heart going, his blood pumping and so forth. Nothing is working. And he's dead for 20 minutes. At which time, I'm giving you the fast version of this. There's like a 3-page version of this in my book. But the short version of this is that he left his body. And he had a totally different experience from Henry. He completely left his body and left the hospital room in the hospital, and he left planet Earth in a millisecond. He found himself, he said he was out in space, the way he described it to me. He said he was out in space, and he saw more stars that he's ever seen on the darkest night on planet Earth that he's ever been in any place on Earth. And he was out in the stars, and then he felt very, very much at peace, completely at home, and he started hearing a sound of music. And it turns out down on Earth, Diane was singing a song that they both recognized, but that they knew. And she was singing a song right next to his bed. She was actually singing a puja, which those of you know, that's an Indian, a Vedic song in Sanskrit, ancient language. And she was singing this that they both knew. He heard it. he liked it, and as soon as he liked it, his mind, so what's driving him there? Here's a little bit of an additional thing I haven't talked about before in previous sessions. What's driving the mind at that point? Desire. His desire, his liking of the song, his desire started pushing his mind in the direction, his soul, his spirit, his consciousness, whatever you want to call it, I say mind, in the direction of the song, which is back down on earth. So then he starts shooting down towards earth. Well, he didn't know where earth was, but he starts going in some direction. And he felt himself moving. How could you feel yourself moving if you're just a mental experience? We had the experience of relative motion because all of a sudden he saw hundreds, maybe thousands of beings of light on either side of him who were stationary, kind of floating in space, he said, as if stationary, and he's going past them really fast. That's how he had the experience of relative motion. You know what that is. You don't know how fast you're going unless you have something that's not moving, okay? And they were not moving, so that's how how fast he was shooting past them. So it was like a tunnel they kind of made a tunnel, loosely speaking. And he didn't know who they were. He recognized a few as old teachers of his, but other than that, he didn't recognize a lot of people, I think, who were just kind of saying, "Hey, look at this guy. Just check it out. This is like a fireworks show. It's like a fireworks show in heaven, or what do you want to call this? It's like fireworks is going on. Yeah, this guy Jay Peters over there, he just died. Let's go check that out. Boom, and then everybody shows up because they're light beings and they can get places really fast after we die, right? And so boom, there they are, watching them. And he slammed back into his body on planet Earth in the hospital room. He sat up after 20 minutes being dead, medically, clinically dead, and he said, "Diane, who are these people and what are they doing here? Where am I?" He was totally disoriented. And so another experience, very different, an NDE, near-death experience, different from Henry's. That's why I tell that story, okay? And so you have other NDEs, people who are burning, maybe being burned and come back after being burned, like burnt in a car accident, and not feeling the burning. But clearly get third-degree burns when they get out of the hospital. They've had skin grafts and all that stuff, and very serious stuff, third-degree burns, open for infection and all that, but they live through it. And then they talk about having, when they were burning in the car, not feeling any pain, no burning sensation. Clearly an out-of-body near-death experience. The mind, in a sense, is escaping from the body, floating up outside the body. Right? Interesting. Questions? Anything? Let's open it up to questions and comments. Let's see what people have written here. You can speak. Take yourself off of your mute buttons and feel free to ask questions. Let's see. Harpo says, "You said we go on after death with the same mind." Yep, we talked about that last time. "How does the world get any better if we come back with the same mind, or do we learn enough lessons to change?" So, how does the world get better? The world gets better if people start making better choices. That's the bottom line, right? Better. What does better mean, though? They make choices. What I mean by better is people start making choices that are less hurtful to others. They make choices that are allowing other people to make free will decisions and stop trying to force them to make decisions that they want them to make. But cruelty is what you've heard me talk about, is that either negligent or intentional desire to harm other people for your own happiness. All right? That's how the world gets better. Reducing the level of cruelty in the world is something that I'm doing in my nonprofit work as well in various ways. But inherent in your question here, Harpo, is learning lessons. So people learn lessons if they want to learn lessons. You don't learn if you don't want to learn, obviously. You cannot force people to learn. And so I would say, based on my observation of most of the people on planet Earth, is they're not here to learn lessons. They don't want to learn lessons. So this whole New Age notion that people are here to learn, to be candid, I think it's a lot of baloney. People are only here to learn if they want to learn. So this is not a place of learning. This is a place of experience. That's the way I view planet Earth. It's a place of different kind of experience than when you're on the other side. So people will choose to come here for the different quality and type of experiences you can have here that you can't have on other worlds or in other planes of existence or in what we call the afterlife or heaven or whatever you want to call that. The notion of lessons is something that I think got inculcated into the New Age thinking by people who want people to learn lessons. They would like it if people learned lessons, and they think if people learned lessons, then the world would be a better place. Well, maybe, but you can't force people to learn lessons who don't want to learn. So that's why I say that's a bunch of baloney. I may be a little bit harsh. Those of you know I can be candid and direct. I don't mean to be harsh. But what I mean by that is coming out with a precept or a principle that we are all here to learn lessons. And you're here to learn lessons. And you're here to learn lessons. And taking that kind of attitude towards people is usurping their free will. Because if they don't want to learn lessons, that's their free will not to learn lessons. And so I am a free will proponent, not a regulator. So those people, if you see people doing that, think about it through that lens. They're wanting to regulate other people's behavior. They think that if they can regulate their behavior, saying they're here to learn lessons, we're all here to learn lessons, and how come they're not learning lessons? That is harsh in my mind. Because in a sense, what they're saying is, I know better than those people do, and they really should be learning lessons, and I know the lessons that they probably should be learning. I want to take away their free will and get them to be in classrooms learning lessons. That's a slippery slope. Think about it. So I'm just going to leave that with you. We can have a whole session on free will. I don't want to derail our discussions about NDEs and OBEs here. What's the difference, if any, OBEs and lucid dreams? So I think we talked about that already. They're different, right? But they're related. They can be related. And in lucid dreams, where you have control, there's various degrees, of control that you can have in your dreams. Sometimes you can control a lot in your dreams, in their lucid dreams. Other times, lucid dreams are just like, wow, really real, like totally real. I was there, It's not like things are changing into, like the lamp doesn't change into a pillow like it does in some dreams. Lucid dreams is like, wow, it's just real life. There's different stages of that, but they're related to out-of-body experiences in the sense that your mind is very clear in those dreams, and your mind is even experience an identity of itself within those lucid dreams that we don't experience that same level or degree of identity of self in kooky, crazy dreams, if that makes sense to you, okay? I once saw my husband emitting sparkling light radiating upwards while he was asleep. Is that me seeing an NDE of him? No, that's you seeing his energy field. That's what you're seeing there. I assume you say while he was asleep. So he was still alive. So he's not having a near-death experience. He's alive, having he's dreaming, or who knows what he's having experientially. What you're experiencing is seeing his energy field, which we all have. And you could argue, you could say you're seeing his mind, because when I talk about energy field, mind, soul, consciousness, that's kind of all of one and the same thing that I'm talking about here too, okay? How do you see karma playing into what you're stating regarding physical existence? So it depends what you mean by karma. So what most people mean by karma is, and what the ancient scriptures out of India, where the whole notion of karma originated in India, thousands of years ago, they're usually talking about this consequences of your actions, and if you do things that are bad, then you build up bad karma. You do things good, you build up good karma, and it's like this credit system. It's like this incredible banking system. It's like a spiritual bank, all right? It's of debits and credits. And first of all, I've never believed in karma in that way. I've never ever bought into that whole notion. I always thought it was kind of didn't make sense to me. And then those of you who've seen the 30th November talk, 30thnovember.com, you see that talk. They on the other side are talking about it, and I have had subsequent conversations with the same people that George Hammond talked with in 30th November, before 30th November, and he spoke about it in that video. I've had similar conversations, same conversations, similar conversations with the same people. Jesus, Jehovah, John the Baptist, Shankara, the progenitor, the startup, Vyasa and Shankara, same person. Those of you who know Vedic history, same person. The Bhagavad Gita, the person who wrote the Bhagavad Gita, and the Upanishads, and the Veda, and the Rig Veda, and all the Vedas, and so forth. That person, and Shankara, who wrote the commentary and all of them, same person, reincarnated. We've had conversations together. They agree that this notion of karma was something they made up, that to try to help mankind, and it really they've discarded it in terms of this mountain of karma idea. If you're talking about karma as consequences of our actions, yeah, okay, we can talk about karma that way, but that's not the way most people think of karma, okay? And so consequences of actions, our actions have consequences. Our behavior has consequences. So if you want to talk about karma purely in that way, I can have a conversation with you, and I agree with that definition of karma. But most people in the spiritual world start there, and then they take it to this, but then there's mountains of karma, and you have to just do all this, come back to reincarnate, and you have to get rid of your mountain of karma by doing the good actions, and blah, blah, blah. And that's what I call this spiritual banking system. No, it's not like you got a check register and this accounting system. No, nobody is doing that. That's the Vedic version of the sins that the Christianity's folks created, that Paul and his subsequent followers created. It's just a different version of the same thing. Punishments and rewards. Punishments and rewards. That's what I say is not part of the equation, okay? It's a free will universe. Nobody's keeping score except yourself. You can keep score. That's between you and you, though. There's not some external system, okay? Hope that helps. It's really important. There's a huge amount of suffering in the world created around this idea of sin, punishment, reward, bad karma, good karma, learning lessons. I'm not saying not learn lessons. I'm not saying learning lessons is bad. I'm just saying it's not what everybody has chosen to do. Some of us have. I have. Many of you have, but not everybody has. And we have to be not only tolerant, we have to be free to allow everybody to choose whatever they want to choose. That's what free will means. And if most people in the world, which is my observation, most people in the world out of the 7.5 billion in the world choose not to really look at their lives as a place to learn lessons. Except sometimes if they really get whacked hard in the side of the head, either through disease, accident, or loss, then that's their choice, So, free will. That this is a big part of my mission for the rest of my life too, is to promote this idea of free will, which is what Jesus and Jehovah were about back 2,000 years ago. We can have more discussion on that when we get to that in a subsequent session. But questions on NDEs, getting a glimpse of the other side, out-of-body experiences, anything else? Other questions, comments?
Hey.
Yes, Susan.
You've talked about NDEs and how there's light involved and people tend to feel drawn somewhere. I was really sick about a year ago, and I apparently was barely hanging in there at points. I was not aware of this release so much at the time. And I just had this real vivid experience where I thought I was asleep, and I don't know, maybe I was dreaming. I really don't know, but I had this experience where I had gotten out of bed. Well, I couldn't really get out of bed at this point, and to the right of me was it was the bathroom, but there was in this situation a heating element that was in the bathroom was glowing with a red intense heat, very ominous and threatening. And then it was flames a bit, and then on the other side where the door was to the room, there was this is so silly. There was a sound of a birthday party going on, and people walking by, and they were a bit abnormally bright, but not purely light, taking a cake. And there was something where I got a hotel key in my hand at some point during this. And this was all very curious to me. I don't know if it sounds like anything. I didn't obviously die. It was just very vivid and very strange, and I guess I came back to bed. But yeah, it's always been in my mind, what in the world was that?
Yeah, and so how sick were you at the time?
I was hanging by a thread.
Hanging by a thread?
In the hospital, yep.
In the hospital, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you had this mental experience, and you kind of, in a sense, came to, in a sense, whatever you want to call that afterwards, how did you feel? How did you assess it? What did you think at the time?
I thought, well, wasn't that odd? And I had been scared, and I was, I guess, in a way relieved to be awake, back with myself and in the hospital room. But it's certainly, I haven't forgotten it.
Yeah. And so I want to reframe and just see if I heard that correctly. So
Yes.
Accurately. So on the right side, you felt heat, and there was some fear associated with that. Is that right? In the flame?
Yeah, there was the figure of a nurse on the right in the bathroom area, but in the bathroom there was a heat source flame, very red. There was just this overall red, intense light, very hot.
So,
and then on the other side.
Well, hold on before you go to the other side. So on that side, on the right side, are you saying in the hospital room there was a bathroom there, and you also?
Yes, in actuality, there was a bathroom in that hospital room, and in actuality, there was a door to the left side that was the exit door.
Okay. And in actuality, there was a heater in the bathroom, or no? That's just in your mental experience.
There was some, I don't know. Yeah, there was something. It was either a heater or a. It was either a heater or there was some device over there.
Yeah.
It might have been something to do with the sink. I don't know anymore.
I'm just curious. The reason I'm asking is because we can have these kinds of experiences that are kind of a little bit in there and a little bit out there. And if there was a heater there, we will feel the heat, and then we can make an association. In other words, our body could feel the actual heat, and then our mind will make an association. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very similar to the way I taught you meditation, in the sense, analogous, in the sense that, you remember I talk about how the emotions are generally associated, whether the content of the emotion, in other words, whether you feel bored, afraid, or restless, or whatever, that's what I mean when I say content of the emotion, and the intensity is generally associated with the old stress that you may be releasing in your meditation. But the thought that you're having is usually it's whatever's going through your mind. So in this case, analogously, you actually may have felt heat, but then the thought that you're having is just whatever's going through your mind associated with that heat. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that could be, and then it's hard to say. And then on the birthday thing on the left side, there's nothing going on the left side in actuality in your hospital room, right?
Not that I know.
Yeah, that was just a pure mental experience. So this sounds to me like a little combo on the right, and then a pure mental experience on the left. And the combo on the right, if I had to guess, and you had some fear there, so you had, who knows what the fear is related to in terms of some heat experience that you may have had in the past. But the experience on the left, you're having a quasi NDE-ish experience. We don't know for sure, but you said you were hanging by a thread. So you're definitely out of your body having this experience, and you said it was brighter on the left side with this. It was kind of lit up, this energy. So let's talk about the brightness. I want to talk about this, and you can extrapolate from what I'm going to say, and you can apply it to that experience there too. Okay. Because remember, what happens when we die? We talked a little bit about this last time, about how it's not that different from this side, right? You can have birthday parties if you want, whatever, and so you very well may have been witnessing somebody's birthday party, and you kind of were on the doorstep of death, physical death, we could say, but mentally you were still awake then, okay? And yet still have some fear. So again, what does this point out to everybody? It points out the importance of what I'm doing in my work, which is to help people reduce their fears now, so we have less fears when we actually die. And our body dies and our mind continues. We want to have less fear, because even as you're having this, what we'll call this near-death experience, Susan, you still have this vestige of fear. We don't know what the fear is related to, but the fear is there, okay? And so we want to reduce these as much as possible now, so we can live more in the present now, enjoyable with less fear. And also when we die, we have less fear. Okay, let me come back to this light experience. This is an important thing, I think, for everybody to realize. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Eben Alexander's experience. That he's a former neurosurgeon. Proof of Heaven is his book, and so forth. He's out on speaking tour and stuff. I've met him, and we exchanged books and stuff. Anyway, different people have different experiences of light on the other side. And remember, we may have talked about this. I think we talked about this somewhat on the last session, but I just want to remind you that there's a lot of different reasons why you may experience light. But this idea of being drawn to the light or going to the light and so forth, I think it's a little overblown. But I understand why people will describe it that way and why that experience will happen for many people. Let me say it to you this way. The less experience you have with the light experience, and when I say light, I don't mean heavier light. I mean brightness or not. I'm talking about L-I-G-H-T, light as in like lamplight, light, brightness. The more experience you have, or the less experience, let me say it to you this way. The less experience one has with how light and bright the mind the soul is, as a bright object, really, in a sense, the more shocked one is when one has a near-death experience or when one dies and sees this lightness and this what they describe as a tunnel of light sometimes, and not everybody has a tunnel of light experience, like Jay didn't. He was just out there. But the more shocked and surprised people are about light, the more they come back and they talk about how incredibly bright the light is. I'm not saying the light isn't bright, because it's a lot brighter than, as I said last time in our session, than planet Earth. But the surprise, the kind of almost shock, it's like once you've been meditating for years and years and years and years of meditation before you die, it's like no big deal. It's like the brightness that you experience that is your mind just continues, and it's bright. And of course, it's more bright because you don't have all this dark furniture and stuff on the other side. But the contrast is not as great. That's the idea I wanted to share with you. So again, why is it really another value of turning within and meditating and experiencing the mind? And as I said on the Generosity podcast TV interview last week, Jesus' term was find the kingdom of heaven within. You've heard those phrases. It's in the Bible, and I think that's accurate according to my memory of being with him. I use 21st century language. I talk about turning within. It's the same thing. Find the kingdom of heaven within, turn within, turning within meditation. I'm using the same language he did. He and I are talking about the same thing using different language that's appropriate in different times. But by turning within, allowing our minds to experience itself on a regular basis in this natural way, sets us up for when we die, the least contrast of experience, because we become so comfortable, we become so familiar. That's the word I was looking for. We become so familiar with the essential nature of our minds, which is energy, which is light, which is brightness, whatever you want to call that. Pick another synonym that falls into that category. Luminescence, all these different words, same thing. That is our mind. When we die, the transition, the contrast is so minimal. The transition is so smooth. That's what I'm doing in my work. That's what Jesus started doing for the 3 years he was teaching. And that's what I'm continuing to do in my work, is that work that we started 2,000 years ago that I talk about in that in the interview last week. That's what I'm becoming more public about in terms of the work that I'm doing. Overcoming the fear of death is the name of my nonprofit, as you guys know. And overcoming the fear of death was the mission that John the Baptist and Jesus had 2,000 years ago on planet Earth, was to help humanity become less and less fearful about dying. Overcoming the fear of death was the notion. John the Baptist, as you know, died prematurely, prematurely in our thinking, because he was supposed to plow the fields for Jesus, hand the ball to Jesus, and then they were going to continue working together. That didn't happen. And of course, Jesus, as we know, got killed, and nobody predicted that either. So he only after a few years. I'm continuing that in my work now with you and others. That's what I'm doing. So questions. That's a context. I just wanted to give you that from a contextual standpoint of how what I'm doing now fits in with what we started doing 2,000 years ago. Okay? Hey, Patrick. Good to see you. Other questions? Other questions in terms of OBEs, NDEs, etc. Any other experiences people want to share or type out? I'm looking to see if anybody else has anything else they want to type out in the chat room. If you're a little bit shy, feel free. Questions? Anything else? Anything? Okay. So, next session is 2 weeks from tonight. So, the 28th. Same time. And we're going to be talking about reincarnation. We're talking about past lives, future lives. We're going to be talking about, okay, what about reincarnation? How does it happen? How does it unfold? I'm going to give you a lot of different ways to think about reincarnation. I'm going to give you a lot of different analogies and frameworks to think about how they unfold and how they may unfold in your life in a very, very nonlinear way is my experience and my, you could say, research, talking with many other people who have had reincarnation type experiences. So we'll get into that next session. But in the meantime, I encourage you to watch that Generosity TV podcast that I did last week, the link that I sent you via email last night, and or you can find it on my website, either website, kelvinchin.org or overcomingthefearofdeath.org. You'll find it. kelvinchin.org is probably easier to find because there's a lot more media interviews on my Overcoming the Fear of Death website than my kelvinchin.org website. Okay? Great to see everybody. Any other questions you may have, you know how to reach me. You can shoot me an email, text me, whatever afterwards, okay? And I'll get the recording of this session off to you within 24 hours. There's always a delay with YouTube getting it uploaded and so forth, so I'll get it to you as soon as I can tomorrow, okay? Great to see everybody, and have a great evening. We'll see you.